She has over 30 years of experience studying early childhood development and various forms of childcare. Daycare is the least good option for children. Parenting is really important. Prioritizing our children over our work is really important. That is my response to feminists.
Hello, and I want to thank Alex Clark for inviting me and everybody at Turning Point to say that I'm here to speak about how the devaluing and really deprioritizing of motherhood has really contributed to the mental health crisis that we're seeing today in children and adolescents. I just want to look at some statistics with you quickly. 1 in 5 children and adolescents in America will not exit childhood without having a serious mental illness. And we have a quarter of our adolescents having suicidality, not to mention the number of children that are on medication for mental illness. And so what's happening? I wrote a book about 8 years ago called Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. And it basically described what I was seeing in my practice. I am a clinician, I'm a psychoanalyst, which is I was seeing this mental health crisis come at me like a tidal wave. And I was connecting the mental illness in children to the absence of mothers in children's lives on a daily basis. And I started doing my research. And I looked into the epigenetics, the attachment research, and the neuroscience, and found what I believed to be true, and decided to write a book about it. Why are mothers so very important? The first 3 years are considered to be a critical period of right brain development. The right brain is important for so many important things, including emotional regulation, resilience to stress, the ability to have relationships in the future and to trust having those relationships. And so what we know is that mothers are a critical part of that development. By 3 years old, 85% of your right brain is developed, and mothers have a great deal to do with that. One of the researchers that I talked to in my book said that mothers are the central nervous system for children in the first 3 years. And, you know, there is a theory that says that children aren't meant to be born for another 9 months. And so that means that that first year of a child's life is another trimester, if you will, of a child's existence where they're meant to be actually worn on their mother's bodies. So these are some of the things that mothers do for children. They help to regulate children's emotions from moment to moment, keeping their emotions from going too high and too low. They regulate their stress by buffering them from stress in the early years. If we don't buffer our children from stress in those early years, it leads to less stress resilience in the future. And there's something called oxytocin, which is called the love hormone. And it is passed back and forth between mothers and babies in those first 3 years. When mothers give birth, when they breastfeed, and when they nurture, it makes mothers' behavior what we call sensitive and empathic. And lastly, socialization. Mothers teach children how to love and how to trust their environment. You know that there is no gene for mental illness other than schizophrenia and bipolar. So there's no gene for anxiety and depression and ADHD. What there is a gene for sensitivity to stress. And we know now, because we found that gene, that many children are born with that gene. And the research shows that when children receive sensitive, empathic nurturing from present mothers who are physically and emotionally present in the first 3 years, it neutralizes the expression of that gene so those children can be as healthy as children born without that gene. We also know from research, and if you like what I'm telling you, my book is filled with much more. This is just a summary of what's in the book. What we know is that a very famous researcher named Michael Meany found that mammals, and that's what we are, mammals, who licked and groomed their young, passed down stress resilience to their young. But those that didn't lick and groom their young in the early days did not pass down stress resilience and also did not pass down the ability to lick and groom the next generation, which is why we're seeing so many young people, men and women, not wanting children today, because they weren't technically licked and groomed. What is the amygdala? The amygdala is a tiny almond-shaped part of the brain, very primitive part of the brain. It's the threat-sensing, threat-regulating part of the brain. And what we know about this part of the brain is it's meant to stay offline for the first year. And what that means is when babies are born on their mother's bodies with skin-to-skin contact, essentially that mother keeps the stress levels down for that baby. When babies are put into daycare or separated from their mothers in the early days, it creates a great amount of stress for that baby, and it makes the amygdala grow large and very active. Now, what happens? If you leave a light bulb in the kitchen on, eventually that light bulb will burn out, and that's what happens to the amygdala, because the amygdala is not meant to be turned on so early as we are turning it on. And it ceases to be functional in the future when it shrivels up. And so there's an on switch and an off switch to our stress response. So first of all, I'm going to say our stress response is not only normal, but healthy. But it has an on switch and an off switch. The on switch is the amygdala, the off switch is the hippocampus. And what we're seeing in children today is that the on switch remains on because the off switch no longer works. And that causes what we call a hypervigilance in response to stress. It causes the symptom that we call ADHD. ADHD is not a condition. ADHD is a sign of a brain on stress. When we medicate children for ADHD, we are only just medicating a symptom and not getting to the underlying cause. Attachment disorders. So I write about this in my book. Secure attachment means that a mother is the secure attachment love object. And their presence helps the child to feel safe and secure. When that mother isn't physically and emotionally present enough in those first 3 years, children develop attachment disorders. And we are seeing now many generations of attachment disorders. Now, what does that look like? An attachment disorder can look like an avoidant attachment disorder, which is a child who says, right, my mom isn't here to take care of me, so I have to be prematurely defensively independent, and I got to take care of myself. And that leads to depression later on, and it also leads to difficulty having relationships later on. An ambivalent attachment disorder is a baby who clings to their mother for life when they come home because they know their mother could leave them again. That's connected and correlated with anxiety, and a disorganized attachment disorder is the most dangerous, and it leads to borderline personality disorders, and it's when a baby has no strategy. So you could say avoidant and ambivalent are strategies. When a baby has no strategy, they go between slapping their mother, turning away, and clinging to their mother. And as I said, that leads to more borderline personality disorders, which is what we're seeing in great numbers with adolescents today. That's what all the self-harming behavior and suicide is about. Now, what we know is that we have longitudinal research now to show that children who are insecurely attached in the first year are 80% of them are insecurely attached 20 years later. So we have lots of longitudinal research to show that the mental health crisis is in fact attached to attachment disorders. So as Alex was saying, I talk a lot about daycare and why daycare is not good for children. So let me just tell you why daycare is not good for children. One, babies in daycare show very high levels of salivary cortisol. That means the stress hormone is rampant in their little bodies. Babies are not born resilient. They are not born self-sufficient. Don't let anybody tell you it's a load of baloney. They are born neurologically fragile, desperately in need of your protection and your body, your eye contact, your voice, your skin-to-skin contact, to feel safe in the world. When you separate them from your bodies and put them in daycare at 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, what you are doing is you're raising their stress levels. And that means that they are going to be less resilient to stress in the future. And also daycare is tied to early signs of aggression and behavioral problems in children, hyperactivity and anxiety. So we know, we have evidence now to show that daycare is not good for children, yet it's promoted. Again, if you want to say it's promoted to get more women into the workforce more quickly. I'm a working woman. I have no issue. My book was not about not working. My book was about the fact that when we have very young children, their needs must come first if we want them to be mentally healthy. And so that means have a brilliant career before you have children. Have a brilliant career after you have after your children are grown. But in the time that your children are very small, ratchet down your career or take time off, because there's nothing more important than the future mental health of your children. You know, I know it's hard for your generation. I know the messaging because I'm almost 60, and I can tell you that the messaging in your generation has been tough, which is that you should go, go, go and put work first and be financially and socioeconomically successful and get lots of material things and have power and high achievement. And that's all a great message as a woman until you have young children. And then that needs to be exchanged for a time, for a message of love and nurturing and sacrifice. But you know what? Whatever your identity was before you have children, you do not lose it. You keep it. If you were a lawyer, if you were a doctor, if you were a businesswoman, you keep that identity. No one takes it away from you. And I can tell you that menopause is the most fruitful and productive time of your life. And so you will not, getting off of that linear track does not mean you won't be successful. But taking time off to be with your children or ratcheting down your career will make your children healthy. So I'm going to end with this quote, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. C.S. Lewis said, "Children are not a distraction from more important work. They are the most important work." So questions?
We're going to start on your right.
Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Rachel, and I've grown up as a very intense, argumentative, high-achieving individual. And I've had a lot of my friends say that they are afraid for my children because I want everyone to be efficient, and I want them to be on time, and I want us to get things done, which is sometimes a weakness. But I was just wondering, what is your advice for raising kids who are, especially when they're teenagers, who are high-achieving, efficient individuals without stressing them out, without pressuring them, without making them feel like their value is in their achievements?
That's a very good question. So you would say that the messaging is very internal in parents. It's very unconscious. So even though parents may say the words, just do the best you can, they may mean something else. So parents really are responsible for the messaging, both externally in terms of what they say and internally in terms of how they actually feel. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is to remember that every child is an individual and different, and the goal is not for every child to be a straight-A student. The goal is for every child to do the best that they can and to find their strengths. As a parent, your goal is to help to find your individual child's strengths and help to promote them, but also to help that child to embrace and accept their limitations. And that's something we don't do today.
Thank you so much.
To your left. To your left.
Oh, sorry.
First, I want to say thank you for your work. I heard your episode with Lila Rose, and I thought I would just lock it up in here and not mention it to anyone. And after that, I haven't stopped talking about you to the park mom, to a stranger mom. It's just on everyone's mind. And I want to ask advice on parenting a sensitive child, a sensitive baby.
So let me define a sensitive baby first for those of you who haven't read the book or don't know. A sensitive baby is a baby who's more sensitive to stress. It may be a baby who cries more easily, who's harder to soothe, who doesn't want to go to sleep at night, who has more tantrums. They're basically just neurologically fragile and neurologically sensitive. And the idea is empathy and sensitivity is how you parent a sensitive child. So as the research says, when you meet a sensitive child where they are with sensitivity, you neutralize the sensitivity. I think the math problem was 2 negatives equal a positive, but when you're sensitive with a child who's sensitive, you make them strong.
Hi, to make it really short, I'm just curious about your thoughts on circumcision.
Female or male? Okay, I have to ask, So I'm Jewish. so in all, truth in advertising here. It is a religious ritual for us, but I have to say Jews began it as a ritual. It was a health ritual. Because in the olden days, just like being kosher was a health ritual, right? If you ate pork, you got trichinosis and you died, and we had 6,000 years to figure this out with trial and error. So we also had 6,000 years to figure out that if little boys' penises got bacterial and they didn't clean them, they could die of infection. Remember, there were no antibiotics in those days. So it also began as a health ritual. And my feeling about it is that I never pressure anyone to do it. But to say that there are still good reasons with very young children who do not know how to keep themselves clean and will not keep themselves clean. I can only say that because I've seen my college son's dorm rooms and their bathrooms, and that my son may not use soap on his face for a week, you know. To say that there are good health reasons to do it, but I never pressure anyone to do it.
Great, thank you. Hi, my question as a nanny to young kids is how do I guess, embrace that attachment because I nanny a 6-month-old, a 1-year-old, and a 3-year-old.
How do you embrace the attachment as a nanny?
Yeah.
Fully. So what I'll say is that I didn't get to talk to you about caregiving. When you can't be there for your children, the best case scenario is to be there. The next best is to have kinship bonds, which is a family member who has the most similar investment in your child and will be there forever and ever. And the third is a single surrogate caregiver or a nanny. Because they're consistent, because they're going to love your child with the same sensitive, empathic nurturing. Make sure you find a nanny who is sensitive, empathic, and nurturing. And then treat your nanny with great respect because they are doing an incredible job, because when you are not there, they are you, and you want them to be you. You want your child to attach to that nanny. What often happens, and I live in New York City, and this happens quite often, is that mothers get threatened by their nannies when their nannies get too close, because they feel ambivalent about their stepping back from that role of being a mother. But the reality is, if your child is not attached to your nanny or your babysitter, then when you are not there, your child will be bereft, and the loss will be even greater. So in fact, you want to encourage that love, that affection, that connection. And if you have a good nanny, you want to keep them for 18 years. I hope that answers the question.
Hi, so I was diagnosed with ADHD in 4th grade, and my mom didn't want me to go on Adderall due to all the horrible side effects, so I went on a gluten-free diet. And since then, I have been able to really overcome a lot of the things I've faced with ADHD. What's your perspective on that, and would you encourage it?
The gluten-free diet or not being medicated?
Both.
Okay. I write a lot about not medicating for ADHD. As I said, it's a stress response. So giving medication, giving a stimulant for overriding the neurological system with a stimulant for ADHD is like giving Tylenol for a brain tumor, for the headaches of a brain tumor. You are not getting to the root of the stress. So your mother was correct in saying unless it was so extreme that the medication was used as a bridge for therapy, it's the therapy. And I'm not talking CBT therapy. I'm talking feelings-oriented, when you're a child, play therapy, when you get to be a teenager, talk therapy, with a psychodynamic, psychoanalytic psychotherapist who's going to help you get to the root of what are the psychosocial stressors, what are the internal stressors that are causing that stress, which is making your brain go into a hypervigilant mode. So, you know, the fact that the gluten helped, I mean, gluten is an inflammatory, so I'm sure that did help, but I also am sure that your mother supporting you and saying, we can reduce your stress in other ways, probably actually helped to reduce your stress.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. So I grew up as an only child with an only father, with an absent mother from my life. So what I was wondering is, what advice would you give children with an absent mother in their life? What advice would you give them?
Well, what I would say is that it's a really sad thing. It causes something called anaclitic depression, which is the loss of mother, and it's depression from that. Therapy is the key, and when you're young, it's play therapy and talk therapy, and even when you get older and you're still suffering from that loss, because that loss doesn't go away, it's still there. I would say talk therapy with someone who is not a CBT therapist. Again, I'm going to say CBT is a good kind of therapy for certain things, like OCD it can help with, or stopping smoking. But in terms of a deeper understanding of that loss and really grieving the loss of your mother, seek out a really good psychodynamic psychotherapist who's really going to get underneath and help you grieve that loss. Yeah.
Hi. I have some questions. I have a 15-year-old daughter. I was with her for the first 13 months, but due to my marriage falling apart, I had to go back to work. I'm a teacher. I chose something where I could be at home with my kids as much as possible. So she was with my mom from 1 to 2, and then she went to a Christian daycare 2 to 3. I just came upon your research recently, and my daughter does suffer with ADHD, anxiety, and depression. There's no medication that we have gone on, nor do I want to, but I want to know your advice, how I can navigate that with my daughter, because I'm now seeing that maybe it had something to do with those first 3 years and the high stress I was under during pregnancy.
So the reality is the first 3 years is what we call the first critical period of brain development, but there's another critical period of brain development, which is adolescence, 9 to 25. In the first 3 years, the brain is growing like crazy. It overgrows, like a garden that's overgrown. And then in adolescence, the brain prunes back all of the neurons it doesn't need. So that means that the brain is, again, very plastic and susceptible to the environment. And so in adolescence, from 9 to 25, you have another opportunity to really make a difference in terms of helping your child to regulate their emotions. So I recommend that book to you, but also a lot of the same things you do in the first 3 years, you do again in adolescence. The skin-to-skin contact, the time, the physical and emotional presence that you may not have been able to give her because of circumstances beyond your control. You have another, in fact, my second book is called Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. Woo, that's a mouthful. It should have been called, as my title was meant to be called, Second Chances. So I leave you with that.
This will be the last question.
Okay?
Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for your work. I came to this conference to thank you, and you've changed my life with your research. My question is, you speak a lot in your book about if a mom is experiencing boredom, raising her children at home. What about a mom who's experiencing burnout at home with her children?
That's a real thing. And so are boring moments. So just to be clear, I do talk about boredom, but I talk about the fact that any job that's really hard and routine has boring moments. But when I talk about mothers being bored, I connect it to depression when it's pervasive boredom. Because we say it's unnatural for a mother to feel pervasive boredom with the raising of her own child. Maybe the raising of somebody else's child, you can feel pervasive boredom, but not the raising of your own. But in terms of, not just boredom, but burnout, mothers need time. We never were meant to raise children in isolation, never. We always raise children in communities, in extended family communities. If you don't have your family here, then you create a community of women who can support you because you need time. You need time for yourself. You need time to exercise. You need time to shower. You need time to go out and see a friend. You need time to sleep. And so time is a commodity. We only get 24 hours. But what I would say is my book never intended, and I know people can misinterpret it, that you're meant to be with your baby every second. You do need some self-care and time for yourself so you don't burn out. That's very, very important. You can't do that if you don't have a community. So you must create community. Thank you.